Hello everyone and welcome to the very first episode of Harmonious Minds. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I really hope you can find something that you will find beneficial or that will resonate with you within these episodes. My name's Hannah. I'm currently a fourth year undergrad student at Trinity Laban in London, and like many other musicians, I suffer from performance anxiety. I started this project because I really wanted to explore the stigmas around performance anxiety for musicians, and I really wanted to create a resource or a place for musicians to consolidate. The purpose of these podcasts is to explore different resources, ideas, different methods, and help to debunk the stigma around performance anxiety. For it to affect so many of us, I think it's really important to keep the conversation going and keep really open about it. In this first episode, I just wanted to sit down and contextualize a little bit and have a little bit of a talk about what lies underneath the problem and put a bit more background to it. We're mostly going to be describing some of the key concepts of performance anxiety. In later episodes, we'll have a little look at exploring some different techniques in case you'd like to start trying some things at home to see if they might benefit you. I'd also like to add a super quick disclaimer. I am by no means a medical practitioner or a psychotherapist. The expressions in these podcasts are my own thoughts, deductions, and ideas based on research conducted for this project. I'm most likely going to leave a Google Doc link in the Instagram bio for @Harmonious Minds podcast. You're very welcome to have a look at that there. I'll link each episode, all the research done, so you're more than welcome to have a look at those for yourself. For me, my anxiety first came to light in my first year of music college back in 2018, which feels such a long but short time ago. It's only 3 years ago, but I feel like it's gone both really fast and a lot has happened since then. I just moved to London for the very first time. I'd moved from a small village in Surrey, and suddenly I was in this amazing institution surrounded by insanely talented people, and boy, I was nervous. I remember the very first performance and my legs were like jelly. I think it was in Italian song class, but I just remember I couldn't stop shaking, and I just remember coming away and thinking after, whoa, what the heck just happened? And I'd always loved singing and I had been nervous before, but I'd never really experienced it on that kind of level. And subsequently, this kind of led to a bit of a downward decline in self-esteem and in well-being, and in this never-ending cycle, seemingly, of beating myself up because my instrument wasn't doing what I wanted it to. I felt very useless, very weak, and very terrible, and really had no idea about where to start solving it. Thus began my journey into mindfulness and seeing exactly how anxiety works. So, what exactly is performance anxiety, and why isn't it a one-size-fits-all approach? Music performance anxiety is described as a complex phenomenon caused by the interaction of many factors, including genetics, environmental stimuli, and the individual's experience, emotions, cognitions, and behaviors. The three causes are most commonly cited by musicians as pressure from self, excessive arousal, and inadequate preparation for performance. So, if we're looking at it from a biological point of view, when we're relaxed or not in performance state, the prefrontal cortex, this is the key decision-making part of the brain, is subdued. It's relaxed. There's not really a lot going on. When we face intensely high pressure, the prefrontal cortex kicks into high gear. It releases chemicals like, you've probably heard of adrenaline, cortisol, which is the stress hormone. All these different chemicals are kicking off and they start interfering with our key balanced decision-making centers. Thus, this leaves us more likely to crack under pressure, and it kicks off our body's fight or flight response. Stress also releases chemicals like dopamine, which is part of the brain's reward system. So when we're stressed, things are getting a little bit crazy. We have all these chemicals kicking off that is completely altering our decision-making centers and giving us physical symptoms as well. But we also have our reward center kicking off. So it becomes more likely that we'll return to this brain path, if you were, the next time we perform, and can very quickly start drilling itself into our conscious and subconscious. And we have to perform a lot as musicians. most of us pretty much every day, so it's very easy for the problem to start seeping in. Now, we're all wired up differently and we've all gone through different things in life, so the physical symptoms are usually different for every person. But some of the physical symptoms include dry mouth, chills, tension, sweating, increased heart rate, and breathlessness, to name but a few. And the detriment to us as musicians is, unfortunately, that our playing is impaired. For example, something specific to singers, our bodies should be free of tension, or tension that doesn't otherwise serve us in our singing. Some people's responses is to tighten muscles, often the throat, the belly, the shoulders, which are all integral to performance and achieving ease and freedom in our voices. So who exactly experiences performance anxiety? Perhaps the most obvious but most important point to start with is pretty much most performers will experience performance anxiety to some extent at some point during their career. No matter how big or large the audience is, no matter how well we do or don't know them, we can boil the reasons down to being two different types of fear. The first being the fear of our own ability to perform well, and the second being the fear of failing the performance before it's even started. Performance is deeply psychological. How we're feeling, how we feel about our instrument, ourselves, is so deeply connected to our instrument. Anything that we show will be clearly seen and felt by our audience. If we don't look after ourselves when we perform, and if our minds are not well conditioned, our playing will follow suit. In fact, a lot of our practice is not just about technique, but it's also conditioning our mind to be healthy, truthful, open to vulnerability, that enables us to speak our truth, if you like. Performing ultimately is a really brave thing to do and can understandably leave us feeling very vulnerable. It's an unnatural and abnormal thing for us to get up in front of hundreds of people, sometimes even thousands, perform a highly skilled subject that may or may not go right or wrong for the judgment of many other people. I don't know about you, but to me that sounds really scary. But where do these nerves all come from? So, the fight or flight system, which is the primal system which kickstarts adrenaline. It's the same nervous system that warns us when we're in danger. Our brain registers it as the same thing. It's there to defend us. Of course, historically, if we were being chased by a bear in the wilderness, this would have been a great thing, but we're just playing music. Why the hell do we experience it in front of just regular people like ourselves? More often than not, it comes from the pressure of having to maintain a high standard, to which may have been demonstrated previously, and you feel like you have a reputation or a standard to uphold, normally within a specific group of people that you really care about. The people closest to us can often make us feel the most vulnerable, because they have a more developed and a deeper understanding of us, and we can worry that our value of us as performers will be measured by this experience, or that the image that they have of us may change, or that we might even be thought less of if we do not perform well. This also makes another primal link into wanting acceptance into a tribe. If someone says something or reacts poorly in a way that hurts our feelings, or we experience hostility within our groups that is a deep-rooted fear and rejection hundreds of years ago from, say, a tribe, kicks in our survival instincts, and in our core, it can be devastatingly painful, especially when our instrument is such a centric part to our daily lives. The roots of many performance anxiety is sparked by a sense of identity, and we link this identity to our ability to perform. When our lives are really centric to our craft, and because we spend so much time with it, we begin to correlate this so closely to ourselves as a person. The danger here is falling into a trap and resting the belief that our self-worth is determined by our ability on how well we perform. Given the unpredictability of performing, this is a massive amount of pressure to put on ourselves, and it can set ourselves up in this really vicious cycle, creating even more anxiety and more pressure, and it ironically does the exact opposite of what we want it to do in the first place. We want to set ourselves high standards in order to become a better performer, but instead we beat ourselves down by setting unrealistic and unattainable goals that we can fail to achieve, and we might end up feeling like a failure and beating ourselves down even more. In addition, rather than asking ourselves what's wrong with what I'm doing now and what's wrong with my process and focusing on the factors that are attributing to the outcome, we start to boil the reason down to what's wrong with me, and having this belief that we as people are intrinsically flawed and therefore hardwired as a failure that will never be good enough. Again, this jumps back into this cycle of beating ourselves down and making the problem even worse. There are so many external factors that contribute to performance and how well you perform on the day as a performer. You know, from how well of a night's sleep you've had, to how much time you've had to warm up, to like the temperature of your water, to the temperature of the room. You know, with something as delicate as your instrument, is especially in resting everything on identity, there becomes a really blurred line, almost like a grey area in which the two can merge, that if we cannot perform to high standards, we're not deserving of being proud of our achievements or having opportunity. But you absolutely are. And no matter what stage you are at your development, no matter how many times you've failed or you've had to pick yourself up, never ever allow someone to ever tell you that you are not. I also wanted to touch on the idea of extrinsic versus intrinsic value. As performers, we are faced with a number of unpredictable situations in that many factors are outside of our control. A large factor that comes into play is outside pressure, high pressure from others, having to maintain a certain image. Perhaps we've performed really well the first time and it feels necessary to maintain this image now every single time we perform. We might think, I performed well once. If I have a bad day or I'm not as good as last time, they might see me as a fraud and think that I'm not good enough. The trouble is placing such a high expectation on ourselves every time we perform, thinking in absolutes, thinking everything must be better and better and better every time. And if we fail, or if there's any possibility to fail, then we should just give up and not bother performing at all. Is really detrimental. And one of the hardest things, I think, is breaking away from everything must be absolutely flawless every single time. And then if it's not, then I might as well just not bother putting it out there or making myself vulnerable. I'll just make a fool of myself and people won't like it or no one will be interested, etc., etc. Things like consistency, discipline, being highly attentive, measuring your growth, and being self-aware and a balanced critic are all integral to growth and subsequently to becoming a better musician. But by placing unreasonable pressure on ourselves on the factors that we cannot control can be disproportionately draining and hold us back from this vital learning process of trial and error. Even in an industry that's based on perfectionism, we must allow ourselves to go through the process of trial and error and taking risks. When we feel particularly vulnerable, it can almost feel as though we need to ask permission to make mistakes or permission to perform. And let me tell you, you do not need to ask permission to perform or to make mistakes. You are just as bit as deserving, just as bit as worthy, and you might be at a different stage in your path. But everyone has had to cross that milestone at some point. For many people's development, one of the best things a lot of people find is not only looking after your symptoms, but putting yourself in real performance practice situations. It really allows your conscious and your subconscious mind to get used to the experience, the kinds of things your body feels, and helps you to utilize the adrenaline and all these things that before have been negative emotions to your advantage. Have you ever noticed when you feel you really, really want something to go well, there are times where it falls through. Then other times something you didn't think so much of went better than you could have hoped for. When thinking about an upcoming performance, we can put subconscious barriers up for ourselves by anticipating this is a really big performance I need to prepare for and I'm extremely nervous, but I really, really, really want this to go well. And then we over-focus on the outcome, and by the time the performance comes, we can build up even more pressure on ourselves and it becomes really difficult to deal with. Another detriment that can be really debilitating is getting stuck in polar opposite thinking. If we fail a certain task, or for example, set goals that are way too high, we can become overly harsh when we fail, which subsequently leads back to this vicious spiral of decline. So how do we go about solving it? The first and probably the most important milestone is that your value as a person is not defined by your musical ability, how well you play your instrument or how well you sing. Our instrument is often seen as a direct extension of ourselves, and if we become hyper-fixated on this idea that we are defined by just this, which firstly isn't true and secondly will back us into a corner when the outcome of the performance involves so many factors both in and outside of our control, it's really unfair and unjust to ourselves. We're not just our instrument, we're not just our voice. We are highly complex human beings who experience a multitude of different things on a daily basis. Different emotions bubble up for different reasons we can and can't explain. This could be linked to a trauma response, for example. Our bodies constantly communicate with us and tell us what it needs. When experiencing symptoms, our body is normally trying to tell us something. So probably the first step is start to notice the symptoms when you feel you get nervous and notice how it affects your playing. Bring your attention to the physical symptoms so you know the pinpoints of what you need to address. This may be tension, for example. When our body tenses up, it's actually trying to protect us. A mild version of fight or flight occurs when we're stressed, and even if we're not aware of it, we've cut off our breath supply, our support. And with this, especially if you're a singer or a woodwind or a brass player, for example, or anyone, we need breath to survive. We've cut off our mechanism and we can't operate properly. In trying to help us, our body ironically does the opposite. After noticing your responses, compare them consciously to when you're in an environment where you feel completely comfortable practicing in. Try singing with the symptom or fight or flight response. For example, if you suffer with shallow breath, try singing with shallow breath and then try singing with a fuller breath, just to try and train your brain to notice the difference. Next, identify exercises that are going to help ease these symptoms and build a better bodily awareness. Notice how it affects your playing. Do you feel any pain or strain that wasn't there during your practice? A good place to start, for example, using the example of breathlessness again, is to start with breathing exercises that focus on deep, steady breathing. You don't have to be a singer or a woodwind or a brass player to do this. Finding just a few exercises to put in place before your practice can lay the foundation for a calmer mind and teaching your body exactly what everything needs to do when we get nervous and everything kind of goes out the window. For abdominal tension, you don't have to be a singer or a woodwind or brass player, for example, again. You can try and do a wall squat. You lean slightly off the wall and place your hand gently in your stomach and allow it to loosen. If you just want to try it as a breath control exercise, you can release all your air for 5 counts. Hold for 5 counts. And then inhale, allowing your belly to come out. If you're a singer, you can try singing a phrase or warming up in this position, ensuring the stomach does not tense during the exercise. Also check in to see if the tension hasn't travelled or crept into another area, say the throat, the tongue or the shoulders, keeping the space open in the back. You can repeat this a few times and this will not only allow more breath, but it will also start to engage more support from the correct areas. The next step is to importantly set goals that are smart and realistic. Keep your goals and your standards realistic. Always aim high for yourself. Show up for yourself. Learn to be strict with yourself, but setting goals and standards that are too high or too unattainable will lead you into that ruthless cycle of self-deprecation. Goals that are too harsh or not realistic can set yourself up to fail, and most importantly, we forget to enjoy the process. Additionally, starting to divert attention away from basing your goals on what you see in others. If we compare ourselves to others, not only are we distracted from ourselves, we're also only seeing a surface level, seeing what everyone else is doing, and bringing ourselves back into this vicious cycle. Something interesting someone once said to me was, no two people have the same idea of you. You don't even have the same idea of you as, say, another person does. Everyone has a different idea on you based on their perception of you and their depictions of you and based on their experiences as well. You know the youest of you, basically. You know the youest version of you. And I thought that was very interesting. Throughout our lives, we all experience completely different things. We're all wired up differently. Some people are brought up in more competitive environments, are better equipped to deal with these kinds of situations at this point in their life. Some people naturally don't take things to heart as much or find it easier to detach their emotions from their working life. Again, these are all factors that are outside of our control, and when our attention is diverted from ourselves, we waste direction and energy into trying to replicate someone else, hoping that we will develop these traits we admire, when in reality we begin neglecting ourselves. It's much like trying to use an Android phone and wondering why it doesn't work like an iPhone. They're not the same thing. Bring your focus to your values, your own personal traits, and the things that you like about yourself. Comparing ourselves to others can make ourselves feel like a fraud, not worthy, or that you're not deserving. This is often the result of the inner critic bubbling up and tell us that we're not good enough, that we're undeserving. Often we talk about putting ego aside when we perform and the inner critic aside. The ego is a common phenomenon spoken about by many psychologists. It's based on the idea that a person's psyche is an amalgamation of several different distinct people or egos, such as the wounded child or a controlling personality. Your inner critic exists in your internal world and works to erode your self-confidence. It is the part of your personality that tells you you're not good enough, you don't deserve something you received, or you could have handled a situation better. It thrives on questions like, what's wrong with me? The rallying cry of your inner critic is, it's not them, it's me. These two voices, or two phenomenons if you like, can become the loudest when we perform. It's the self-deprecating voice that is really tricky to put aside when we perform. It becomes the loudest when we're facing significant progress, stressful environments, or change. Both can be a massive detriment to our self-esteem. Something else I really wanted to touch on was external validation or the opinion of others. And especially this point comes back to intrinsic value. The opinion of others isn't something we can really control. We can control how we behave. We can control what we put out into the world, how we respond to feedback, criticism. Very often, the reaction of how someone perceives us is not directly to do with us. It is a projection often of the things that they may be experiencing on the inside. If someone is giving you unsolicited advice or somebody is saying something that hurts you, you are not obligated to take that on board. And if it's hurting you, just let it go. But what if they mention something that I might be missing out on? Well, we are in control of our vessel, as it were. You are not obligated to listen to anything that you do not feel is constructive. This can take time and discipline. Sometimes we hear things and we might not understand it fully at the present point. We may try to take some things on board, and at that time they might not work for us. Malice, however, should not be welcomed, but constructive criticisms is one of the key ways we can look to improve. Respect yourself and respect others. No matter how you feel, how others feel, always try to be empathetic. You are not responsible for how others react to you. You do not need to carry the weight of words that hurt you or that do not serve you constructively. Many people do not intend to be cruel, and sometimes we do have to deal with emotions that eat us up a little bit inside, or that we feel we don't have the capacity or that we don't know how to process. This is, of course, not an excuse for poor behaviour, but try to be as forgiving as possible. Try to let things go, but cast boundaries for yourself where necessary. So I guess just to summarise for the main points of the episode, first of all, you're not alone. All our experiences are so personal and so different. It can be really easy to isolate ourselves and shut ourselves off. Don't feel afraid to reach out and just know that you're not alone. Second, your self-worth is not determined by your ability to perform your instrument or your ability to sing. It's simply not, and don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. And the third and final point, start noticing your triggers and identify your triggers. What are your most common responses to anxiety when you perform? Or perhaps you might experience it around specific people, you might experience it around a specific tutor. Try and get to the root of the symptoms and start to notice these as part of your practice. There is a little survey if you go to our Instagram page. It's literally 2 questions. It takes 2 seconds to fill out. It would mean the world to me if you could. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I really hope you found this useful. Keep safe, keep well, and I will speak to you in the next episode.